Now, today is World Children's Day, and happy World Children's Day from the Nation Media Group. We're going to have a children's conversation for this hour, and it's Shika Mike on the issue of education. Our guest is Shalom Ndiku. He's a public policy expert on education, feeding, and climate change. Shalom, good morning.
Good morning, Eric. Pleasure to be here.
Good to have you here. Before we get into the Shika Mike topic, Jano is going to give you the day's quote.
Yeah, the day's quote is by Achille Mbembe. Power is never just what is done, it is also what is allowed. What do you make of that?
Power is never just what is done, it is also what is
Allowed.
allowed. Wow, I think it's definitely a thinker because it means that what you can do is up to you, right? It's within your abilities. But what is allowed might be subject to other forces, the environment, other actors, stakeholders, interested parties.
Yeah.
And so it just shows that maybe you can't do it alone, but you have to be aware of your environment and what's around you. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah. It's good 2 cents.
That's more than two.
It's actually more than two. I love that interpretation because initially I thought about it as fence sitting or complacency, right?
Yeah.
So when you're keeping quiet and allowing things to happen, that also is exercising your power.
Yes.
In another way.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's good.
So Shalom, you are in the field of public policy and you focus on education, food, and climate change. And when you reach out to us, you said, give me the mic. Give me the mic on this World Children's Day because I want to talk about feeding the children.
True.
And you said you want it to be a national conversation.
True.
Shalom, we don't want to preempt. Shika Mike.
Thank you for the mic, Eric. So I think my proposition is this, that if as a country we're serious about our future and educating our children on this World Children's Day, I think we need to be serious about school feeding and school meals and meals that happen in school. Over the last 2 or so years, I think this has been a priority for me. And I think school meals must move from being just viewed as charity to core national infrastructure. Because as a country, if we can't guarantee our children a daily meal every single day, we're not investing in that future, genuinely.
Okay.
Why?
So why? I think it matters, right? It matters because I think, and obviously this is my opinion, but from our experience, I've seen that hungry kids can't learn, right? And hunger is one of the biggest barriers to learning. A hungry child can't concentrate, right? A hungry child in class already doesn't have the necessary potential that that teacher in a classroom requires for them to be able to absorb and learn what they're being taught. Hunger also eviscerates attendance. You look at schools where if a meal is not guaranteed, and at times the image we have is of schools in the north, you know, in ASAL counties, but even in urban areas, here in Nairobi, in Mombasa, in Kisumu, in Kakamega, Eldoret, you name it, in our informal areas, children won't go to school if they're not guaranteed the opportunity to have that meal because they'd rather stay out and look for ways in which to get that meal. But I think when you talk about children and looking at it from a human rights perspective, it's also very de-dignifying. It robs a child of their dignity. And when you think about equity, going to a class, being forced to learn and your stomach is grumbling, you can't do much. And so for us, I think if we cannot guarantee that a child can sit in class, listen, learn, and be that eventual future successful Kenyan that we want to see, then, you know, we're not fully considering education. And I think that's why it matters.
Why isn't it a national priority? In the children going hungry as we speak in 2025, why isn't it a priority, a national priority?
I think that's a fair question. When we look at school feeding, right? So school feeding sits within the mandate of the Ministry of Education, right? Because this feeding happens in schools. But food insecurity across the board is key. I think, you know, the current administration has prioritized that in its bottom-up economic transformation agenda. But I think there are 2 things that have deprioritized it, as you've asked Janet. The first is that I don't think there's sufficient frameworks in place to institutionalize it. We don't have sufficient policies in place to make school feeding mandatory. And when Eric asks me later to make a case for it, I'll tell you about Brazil. But two, the financing for it. School feeding in this country, the government took over in 2018. And slowly that budget increased up until financial year 23-24, almost hit 5 billion in allocation, the highest we'd seen in this country for school feeding. However, the next financial year, and for these three financial years, it stagnated at 3 billion. Now, that 3 billion only serves 2.6 million learners in our schools. We have 12 million, right? In 2030, we want to have a universal school feeding program. So a lot more needs to be done. So financing and policy frameworks, if there could be a law that mandates that, would be key, and other countries have done that. And I think that's the direction as a country we need to go.
Yeah. Sorry, how many learners did you say the 3 billion serves?
2.6 million.
Of 12 million.
Of 12 million in primary schools.
Okay. I'm thinking through the cost of actually feeding children.
Yeah.
Make a case for me for a school feeding program that is a national commitment, meaning all these 12 million learners get a hot meal every day that exists within our budgetary. Our fiscal space, our current.
So that is the reality, right? Our fiscal space is quite constrained, and school feeding exists within a context of other educational priorities, but also other national priorities for the development of this country.
Atuna classroom.
Yeah.
Shalom.
Exactly, Atuna classroom, right? Now, those should be prioritized as well, right? But hata mahali tuna classroom, Mariam, hatuna chakula. So a child goes in, they have the books, they'll have the classroom, and they're sheltered from the elements. But at the core, maybe they didn't even have that breakfast. Maybe they didn't even have those meals. And when you look at how we think about prioritizing resources in this country, I think when you go back to the basic needs we were taught, right? Food is one of them. Yeah. Food is one of them, and shelter, as you said, right? The classroom and clothes. And so how are we making sure that the resources that go to health, that go to that core infrastructure, but also that see school feeding as a core part of that infrastructure, are prioritized. Within our, for example, just yesterday, the budgetary process has commenced now for the next financial year, and what are called sector hearings were taking place at KICC, open to the public. Mtiote and his end, and yesterday education was on the docket. In the allocations that were there, free day secondary education had the lion's share, 54.6 billion. Next, capitation for junior school, 30.9 billion. Development projects, broad and general, 16 billion. Examination and certification, 9.9, mitiani nakula pesa. Free primary education, thanks to our third president, 7 billion. And then school meals and nutrition, and that captures beyond meals, wash, health, sanitation, 3 billion, right? And now I think it's a matter of really asking ourselves, especially if we're talking about these children, right? Because if we frame it from a rights-based point of view, the observation of World Children's Day today comes actually from the adoption of the Convention on the Rights of the Child in 1989 on 20th November. Kenya is a party to that convention. Our constitution then means that if we adopt that convention and ratify it, it becomes our law. In our constitution, Article 53, a child has a right to adequate nutrition. Article 43, everyone has a right to food. So when we view it that way and we think about those basic needs, I think we need to rebalance how we allocate these resources. And that's the case that I can make, because I think it's an absolute necessity.
Okay.
Yeah.
If I hear you right, you're saying, we're using those many words, national commitment, blah, 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 blah. Are you saying that
many words.
we should school feeding should be a must?
Yeah.
Should be a must. Must
By
be
government.
a must.
By government.
School feeding is a right.
It's a right. I think
And
it's
therefore, every child going to school should be fed through tax funding.
I think government should mandate that all children should be fed, right? Now, tax funding can be a big part of it. Let me give the example of Brazil. Brazil has had a school feeding program that in March this year celebrated 70 years, 7 decades since 1955. Brazil allocates in 2024 134 billion shillings, right? Just over $1 billion to school. Brazil is a larger country, right? It's one of the BRICS. The context is different. But it's taken 7 decades for them to be able to build that out, to feed 40 million children every day in 155,000 schools, right? It takes work, Eric, but it is universal. A lot of countries, mostly developed, and I'll be fair, mostly developed, feed all their children in schools. I think if we are ambitious enough and if we utilize our resources well, I think it's something we can head towards. The government has already made that commitment. It wants a universal school feeding program in the next 5 years. The only problem is that I don't think at this rate is capable of being achieved. For example, in 2024, the Ministry of Education strategic plan planned to be feeding 4 million children, and they're still at 2.6. So it's not just government and taxpayer money, but it's other partners as well, other investors. I think there's a case for the economic investment in school feeding.
Are there any counties showing strong models, one or two that you can speak to, that you think can then be scaled, just to give us an idea of how it's working already in the country?
Absolutely. I can speak to 2 counties, Janet. The first county is the county government of Muranga. In 2022, when the current administration came into power, the county government of Muranga decided that it will roll out a universal, free, subsidized obviously on its part with the revenue it collects, porridge program for its ECD learners. It has about 44,000 ECD learners. Every child in Muranga gets a cup of porridge every single day, 191 days in the year that they're in school. The county government covers these costs. The power of that fortified, healthy cup of porridge is key. It's not ideal because there's lunch, but the county government is ambitious to try and explore that. That's one example. I think the second example is here in the capital city. We have the current administration, again, 2022, coming into power, wanted to explore how to address school hunger in schools. Now, they just didn't look at ECDs. They entered into an intergovernmental agreement looking at the principle of cooperative governance in Article 2 of the Constitution to partner with the national government and feed primary and ECD learners, right? About 300,000 learners every single day getting a meal. The county government subsidizes these meals. Parents only pay 5 shillings. And this has universally, ensured that children in Nairobi within schools can do that. So I think county governments are doing that well, and even at the Devolution Conference in August this year, a model policy on school feeding was launched so that county governments actually have it easier if they want to institutionalize these frameworks to look at this model, contextualize it to their settings, and do so. So I think those are 2 examples that can then be thought about nationally as replicable.
Yes, you mentioned, government is the lead, but you say that it can bring in other players into it. The other players would come into it. Would they be doing it for profit? Or would they be doing it as philanthropy? For example, we have other players who are working with these county governments. Food for Education, for example, has been covered globally in the work that it's doing. Is it a profit or a non-profit entity?
So Food for Education is a non-profit entity, right? Fully an NGO. A lot of actors in the school feeding space are non-profit actors. However, I think there's an opportunity, but also, dare I say, because you've given me the mic, Nishike, a moral obligation for everyone across the board to do it. You go to certain parts of the country where, let's say, like if you go to Marsabit, the Catholic Church is quite prominent and strong. And, they'll be responsible for school feeding interventions. In Turkana, you'll find other sort of more humanitarian NGOs. Corporates as well. We work with, large restaurant chains, property developers that actually give it back as part of CSR. But beyond that, I think that is what we need to shift because and let me speak to my experience with Food for Education because you sort of cited that. The value chain of school feeding, a business case can be made for that because one thing is that when Food for Education started, it was feeding 25 children in 2012. Right now, it's feeding 600,000 learners every single day. What that means is that you've opened up a market guaranteed for farmers to provide food, right? And in them providing this food, they know that guaranteed, come rain, come shine, if we know that children will have to eat hizi kabichi zetu, these tomatoes, the beans will have a market. And that is national. I think, Food for Education, we work with farmers and source products from 14 counties. And it's the case if you look at, other programs that are there. They really open up that economic space so that within the country, an ecosystem, a business ecosystem is created across that value chain to make a case for it. So I think everyone has that obligation to do it, but government would have to lead and show the way.
I get that from, the value chain of the whole thing. Then I'm thinking of actual investors partnering with government. I don't really see what's in it for them, because from a CSR perspective, people like one-offs, Hey, look, I gave you this big bus. Bye, see you next year. This is a sustained, the children will be in school perpetually and more will keep coming. So I'm thinking through long-term how to entrench this in government policy. Like you said, there was already a guideline that, sets it up for counties.
Yes.
So then does it have to be county by county, or is it national? And then how do we entrench it? Like in law, hard facts. If there's a kid in your county, in your ward, lunch is on you.
Perfect. I think there are two parts to your question. I think the first is sort of in that long-term investment case.
Yes.
And then the policy one. All right. So I'll start with the second one. I think it's easier. It's exactly what you said. I think it has to be a national process, right? The counties can do it, and that's great. But obviously that caters to 47 governments within our devolved structure.
Yes.
National government also is responsible for showing policy guidance when it comes to education. So the Ministry of Education right now is at the cusp or on the cusp of finalizing a policy, a national policy on school meals. But beyond that, I think, if there's a law, like Brazil passed a law in 2009 on school feeding, and that law then, guarantees that 30% of all purchases go to smallholder farmers, 50% of purchases must come from women groups, 10% of food, nothing more than 10% should be ultra-processed. And I think we need that detail. We need that detail, right?
The more I hear, the better.
Yeah. We'll find a reason to take you all to Brazil. But coming, and I think that's the direction we need to go, so that we mandate it nationally.
Yes.
But I think I'm more interested in the first question that you asked, Mariam, the long-term solution and the investment. Let's look at it like this. I think it was UNESCO did a study, and that study showed that for every $1 you invest in school feeding, you can get returns of up to $35. Right? For every $1 you invest. And let me tell you why. Let's look at the bigger picture, and let's step out of Kenya kidogo too and look at Africa. It's 2025. In 2050, 1 in 4 people on this globe will be African. Right? A quarter of the planet will be African. Now, that's 25 years from now. We're talking about Gen Alpha. Right? We're talking about, I have a 6-year-old. That 6-year-old then will be 31. Right? That 31-year-old might be sitting in a studio like this hosting a show. Or let's not, just look nationally. They might be working at a company that is responsible for sending people to Mars.
Yeah.
We need to build their gray matter infrastructure. And that's a phrase that I love. It came from the former African Development Bank president, Adesina, when he visited our kitchen in March, and he said, that's what we're building, gray matter infrastructure, right? So how do we then, if we're talking about the future, if we're talking about the labor force we're building, if we're talking about the economy we need to have, not invest in it now for then. For me, that's my case.
Thank you. Even in a short time, that's a really good amount of base to cover. We'll need you back at some point.
I'll be back.
Shalom Ndiku, she had mic today, why school feeding must be a national commitment. We're now ending the show early today. Mariam Bishar, Eric Latif, Janet Bogwa, Fixing the Nation, one conversation at a time. We're crossing over to the Eldoret University graduation. That's going to be covered live, so we'll cross over. Thank you so much. We'll see you again tomorrow, Friday.